call to order meeting, August meeting of the Community Development Housing and Civil Committee. It is the custom of this committee to take consent agenda prior to the general agenda. Are there any items on the general agenda that the committee would like to pull?
Consent agenda.
Tell me what the consent agenda.
I would like staff to please check the ward designations for C10, C11, C12. I don't think they're in the North Ward. I know Wartown is. That's the south side. So if you just make sure, and also that'll be it.
Okay.
All
right. And then are there?
We're not pulling those. You just want them
I
checked.
just want the administrative edits done too.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Brooks? Staff
Yes,
has
there's a
items?
demolition case. It's 2414 Wartown Street. We're requesting that
You know what number?
C43. C43.
That's the
Okay.
one you were talking about.
I did
right.
mention that to the chairman yesterday.
Thank you.
And is there anyone here in the chamber who is here specifically to a housing demolition case that would like to speak to a specific case? What's the address? What's the property? Say that again.
C39.
C39. Okay. Anyone else? All right. With that being said, is there a motion to remove item C43, to accept the consent agenda, removing item C43 and pulling item C39?
I move. Somebody's already hit it. Who hit it?
I've already.
There's been moved and second.
Just wait a minute.
Give it a second and we'll be ready for vote. All right. Those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. That's unanimous. Item C39.
Item C39, Olivia Gamble, property 233 Forest Hill Avenue, North Ward.
Mr. Brooks?
Good afternoon. As mentioned, the property address is 233 Forest Hill Avenue. The ward is the North Ward. The property owner is Belvia M. Gamble. The list pendants was filed at the Register of Deeds office on April 6, 2016. Staff submitted the appropriate notices, hearing, order to repair, or vacate notices were all done. The property became eligible for demolition on November the 25th of 2016. It is in the less than 50% category. The fair market value is $17,500 and the repair cost is $4,235. If the ordinance is approved, the owner will still have 90 days to make the repairs.
All right. And if the property owner is here and present, come forward and give your name and address for the record.
I'm Belvia Gamble, and my address is 4379 Winterbow Road, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27105.
Okay. And so based on what it exists here now, staff has recommended this property to as a demolition order or repair for this property. And so what would you like to be done? Are you here objecting to that, or what is your desire?
I'm objecting because I'm going to repair it.
In what time frame?
I don't have that information. I have several contractors looking at the items that have to be repaired, so I have not yet chosen one yet.
This is in the North Ward, sir. Councilmember Adams.
I will allow her to make the repairs according to the recommendation of the staff, 90 days. I think we should go forward with this as it is, as suggested by Community and Business Development Department.
So you're in support of the recommendation?
Yes. Yes, because if you look at the pictures, it's a lot. I mean, it may not be to the owner, but You know, as we always say, when you live in a neighborhood and they are subjected to this, it's more than a notion. So I'm going to go ahead and go with the recommendation from Mr. Brooks and to see if there's anything that can be done or will be done during the 3-month period.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Indicate.
I move that we follow the recommendations of Community and Business Development, consent item C39 of 90 days.
Is there a second to that motion? It's been moved and second. There are two things. Councilmember Clark?
Do you think you can get this done in 90 days? That's 3 months.
Yes.
Okay. Because just to understand, the motion that's on the floor that's been seconded, we're going to vote on in a minute, is to demolish it, but you have 90 days. We won't do anything for 90 days.
Okay.
And Mr. Brooks, someone from your department can stay in touch with her during the next 90 days just to see how things are going? Okay, thank you. All right.
Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that the motion has been moved by Councilmember Adams and second by Councilmember Bessie. All in favor vote yes. Those opposed, no. That's unanimous.
I have a question on C-43 that we pulled.
Okay. Councilmember Clark?
Yeah. I don't know if we pulled or what we did on C-43. I know we didn't vote on it. I just looked at the pictures. It's actually a burned down house. What are we doing there if we're not going to? Mr. Larson, you're the one that wanted this thing pulled. What are you suggesting we do? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
So could we ask staff to bring that back in 90 days, that one as well? Is that okay with you?
Well, in holding
Yes,
it, it
we've
was
been in
in
communication
anticipation.
with Councilmember Taylor in his ward.
Just real quick, it said in holding it, it was anticipated that we would just hold it, meaning it would come back for an update at the following committee at that time. But go ahead, Mr. Brooks. Just wanted.
When I spoke with the councilman, he was in favor of allowing the new owners who just purchased it out of foreclosure, as you just heard, 4 months to clean the property. The property was burned by the fire department for training. They are disposing of the debris by salvaging it and trying to get as much from the proceeds as possible. But they do believe they will be able to have the site completely cleared and the land seeded and sowed within a 4-month period.
Okay.
And if not, we will bring it back to council at that time.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Mr. Larson?
That is an interesting question then. If our fire department uses a building for training and burns it, what is the responsibility to clean up the site after that burning exercise?
May I address that? Our experience in the past with them had been whatever arrangements they make with the property owner to burn the property, it's very clear to the property owner that they will not clear the land, that they're simply using it as a burn exercise.
Is there compensation involved in that burn?
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't believe it is.
So, Mr. Brooks, you're saying that the
Mr.
property
McIntyre?
owner is aware of that arrangement before the fire department comes in?
Well, these are new owners, but the older owner, the prior owner would have known, yes.
Thank you.
All right. Everyone's questions answered on the item we
Okay.
didn't
Thank you very
pull
much.
specifically?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
before we go to general, can I just make a statement about the 33 of these were rescinded? To me, that's a big win for us. The fact that 33 units that were on a demolition list, we're no longer saying they're going to be torn down. To me, I think that's good progress, and I just want to pat staff on the back for having done that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Item G1.
It just gonna come back.
Item G1, presentation by Imagine Forsyth.
Give your name and address for the record.
I'm Nikki McCormick, and I am with Imagine Forsyth and Second Hearts Food Bank. That's at 3655 Reed Street in Winston-Salem, 27107. And I actually have some handouts for you guys.
Invited Imagine Forsyth to come and give a presentation to the committee. They're doing some interesting work in the community and thought it was imperative that this committee hear some of the work that they're doing in advance of some of the projects we may have that may come before us.
And in light of that invitation, I would like to thank the committee and the entire City Council for the invitation to let you all know about Imagine Forsyth, who we are, what we're doing, and where we're headed. So Imagine Forsyth is a collective impact initiative, and for those of you that aren't familiar with what that means, it is a structured way to bring people together to achieve social change. There are a number of guiding principles that I have provided for you, and I won't go over in detail to save some time. And we're also guided by some basic principles that are rooted in social equity and rooted in being deeply and authentically led by residents. Their identified priorities and involving them in the solutions to the priorities that are identified by them. So to give you just a quick background on the history of Imagine Forsyth and what has brought us to where we are today. In 2015, Feeding America, who is the parent organization for Second Harvest Food Bank, issued a grant through the Laura and John Arnold Foundation at a national level to help food banks specifically enter into a space where they could approach problems that are associated with folks who are hungry and the root causes of hunger. And what this was designed to do was to bring together a cross-sector of partners outside of the hunger sphere in order to address root causes of poverty. So it was a very rigorous grant process that we in Winston-Salem were lucky enough to receive, along with 4 other pilot sites. And on slide 3, I think, in your packet, you can see where the other sites are located: California, Ohio, Vermont, and Nevada. So we are entering year 3. We have spent the past 2 years in heavy and significant planning, relationship building, community engagement. And I wanted to give you all an idea of why we exist. So on our statement of purpose, you can see that we are designed to promote and facilitate individual and family stability in specifically 4 areas: health, housing, income, and food security, with a vision for Forsyth County that we are a diverse community of vibrant, healthy, and strong neighborhoods with engaged residents who share a collective purpose of well-being. So I did not number these, which if I have the pleasure of coming back to you all, I will do so, but you'll see a map that's about halfway through your packet that will show you our current geographic scope. While our long-term vision is all of Forsyth County, we have targeted our efforts to begin our work and have begun our work in the Boston, Thurmond, and what we are calling Greater Cleveland Avenue. That actually goes from Piedmont Park down to the intersection of Business 40. So it is a large swath of East Winston. And then the next page, you'll see our leadership table. Derwin has been gracious enough to help us in a lot of critical pieces of our work as of late. So I do want to recognize him for that. But we have a large number of folks who are at the what we call our leadership table, our advisory board of folks who are guiding our work, who are helping us stick to our mission and our vision, our values, and make the right decisions at each and every turn. And then you can see the structure of Imagine Forsyth. This is a little bit of a different look to many initiatives in the county, in that, as I had said at the beginning, it is deeply resident-led. So we want to make sure that we keep folks who are affected by these issues at the center of our work and guiding our work. So the structure is meant to give you an illustration of that when you look at the far left circle. And then you'll see the leadership table as the advisory board, and you can see the backbone support. Currently, we have 2 staff members, a director of the initiative and a data analyst who works with us through Forsyth Futures. But we just released today 2 additional positions, a community engagement coordinator who will be hired to help us move our work forward in these 2 communities. They will, one of the requirements, qualifications of the position is that they are from Boston Thurmond or Greater Cleveland Avenue. And then we also have a position that we posted today for a collaborative action network facilitator. So the way that Imagine Forsyth works is that we have this leadership table. We engage residents. We work with them to help them identify priorities on what will get them and their families to what they define as stable for themselves. Once those issues are defined, we then work with a cross-sector of organizations and residents to develop a collaborative action network. That collaborative action network is a group of folks who are focused on a single issue. We launched our first one last fall. It is specific to access to healthy and affordable food. And we have just finished our first prototype in the Piedmont Park community. We're awaiting the final data analytics that I would be happy to share with you all once we have the post-evaluation complete. As we move forward into this work, we will launch additional collaborative action networks that focus in other issue areas. So as I said, this first one was access to healthy and affordable food. We'll move forward in the other areas as well: income, housing, / neighborhood, and health. Any questions so far before I wrap this up for you all?
Councilmember Adams?
Yes, thank you for the great work your organization is doing. But what is the prototype launch that you did in Piedmont Park? What is it?
What it was designed to do was to test the hypothesis of if barriers to healthy and affordable food were removed, and in addition to providing nutrition education, cooking classes, helping folks obtain the knowledge necessary to use the healthy and affordable food that was available to them, would it actually result in a change in their consumption behavior? So we worked with 8 different families in Piedmont Park over the course of 8 weeks in that pilot program. And as I said, I would be happy to share the results with you on whether or not we realized any kind of behavior change from those 8 families. The intent of these pilot projects are not to scale out. So it's not to create additional programming because it's the belief of Imagine Forsyth that what we need is not necessarily more resources to go to additional programming. In some cases that could be true. But what we need to do is scale up. So we need to start creating a base of data that shows what works and what doesn't, and then be able to take it up the ladder, so to speak, to create systemic change as opposed to programmatic change.
Thank you.
Councilmember Clark?
Yeah. If you peel the onion back another layer, you have a family that maybe there is very limited income coming in. Maybe it's a single mother, 2 kids, works a part-time job. and therefore she can't afford a car to go to the grocery store to afford fresh food or whatever it may be. Are you also taking that holistic approach? Okay, does this person need job training? What do they need to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the theory behind
okay.
All of our work is that, if someone seeks food assistance at a pantry, the likelihood that they're also experiencing additional obstacles in their life is very high. They're not there just because they're hungry. There's probably health-related issues. There's probably transportation-related issues. There are several. So that is the intent of the program is to look at how we can address root causes of what keeps folks where they are, and help them on a trajectory that they set for themselves to achieve greater stability.
And you would
success.
bring in various, get the term you use, caseworkers or whatever to, if it's job training at Forsyth Tech or whatever it may be, to assist them in getting on the track that they design. Right,
which is the benefit of having the leadership table is that what we've tried to do is pull together a group of folks who have expertise in all of those areas. So it's not Imagine Forsyth creating a job training program. It's Imagine Forsyth coordinating the services that already exist in our community in order to benefit the folks of Boston Thurman and Greater Cleveland Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Bessie?
Yeah. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of what you're actually doing now in your two initial target neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. Based on the material that you handed out, it looks like you've got a food delivery service.
Mm-hmm. That was the pilot. It was a food delivery and nutrition education pilot.
Right. And food delivery, and you were taking people into to the location for nutrition education classes.
At the community center in Piedmont Park.
Okay. And what was the community cupboard reference in that project?
The community cupboard was the name of the food delivery.
Food delivery.
Yes.
All right. And what kinds of sources for the delivered food were you using?
We actually were able to, because Second Harvest Food Bank is involved, we were able to utilize a wide variety of fresh produce that we have access to. And then we also received a grant from Caterpillar that allowed us to supplement the perishable products with non-perishable products over the course of the 8 weeks.
Thank you.
Councilman McIntosh?
What are the data points that you're gathering?
It's a very nice segue. If you will turn to the second and third to the last pages, you'll see an example of the types of performance measures. One of the biggest guiding forces of Imagine Forsyth is that we are data-driven and that we base our decisions on evidence. So it's important to us that we look at, that we move away from a traditional output model in terms of how many people and for the food bank, how many pounds and really look at outcome measurement. So we need to look at all three types of measurement, how much did we do, how well did we do it, and is anybody better off because we did it. So you can see the types of measurements for two of our strategies, community-based transportation service, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, and then our community covered and nutrition education. That actually nicely wraps up what I had for you all today. And again, want to thank you very much for allowing us to be in front of you. I hope that you'll see much more of us in the future as we really get rocking and rolling.
Two things.
Yes, sir.
One, are there some other people here with you today?
There are. I didn't know if it was appropriate for me to introduce my colleagues in this work. Would you like to come forward? Yeah, just come on.
You can get on TV. Come on up.
You can introduce them.
Yeah, sure. That's Jonathan Halsey, for those of you that don't know him, with the Winston-Salem Foundation. And Jessica Kennedy, who her contact information is on that last sheet. She is our data analyst. She is employed at Forsyth Futures, but works exclusively with Imagine Forsyth.
And what was Imagine Forsyth known as prior to Imagine Forsyth?
You may have heard of it called C4C. We worked for a couple of years under C4C, Collaborating for Clients, and for a variety of different reasons, have adopted a new name.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I thought that it would be very much a good opportunity for us to be empowered by this information. One of the things that we'll be tasked with as the mayor has requested this committee to take an examination of the recommendations that are coming down from the Poverty Thought Force, and when we have organizations like this doing work, I think it's very important to hear and to see individuals and organizations that are currently touching in different ways in advance of anything that we may do in the future. So again, thank you all for coming and being present. Without objection, there was a request made prior to the meeting, was going to go along with the agenda as outlined, but there was a request to move item G6 up in the agenda, and if there's not an objection from committee members, I would ask that we take item G6. Okay.
Item G6, presentation of a proposal for a city-funded public art project.
Mr. Chairman, members of City Council, thank you very much for moving this up the agenda. I have with me 3 members of the Public Art Commission, Chairman David Finn, Betsy Towns, and India Beal, and they're here to talk about a project they've been working on, a proposal for the citywide portrait project.
And as you come, we give your name and address just for the record, please.
David Finn, 716 South Hawthorne Road in the city. I'd like to thank members here and the entire council for helping to set up the Public Art Commission, something that's really been long overdue, and we hope that we fulfill your expectations. I want to talk today a little bit about what we've done in the past year since we were set up, and then I'm going to turn this over to Betsy and India, who are going to describe a little bit more in detail the project that we have. Our mission is really to bring something that's exciting, to bring art that's exciting, participatory, inspirational, thought-provoking, and nurtures the soul to Winston-Salem and to Forsyth County. We've really only been in existence for 1 year, as I mentioned, but we really take our job very seriously. We're a working committee. We put in some hours on this work. I want to show you a little bit of what we've done in the next couple of minutes. We commissioned 12 works at the Benton Convention Center. It's a mix, really, of local and regional artists. I think it's been pretty successful. It's just been rolled out recently. And I want to tell you, as we go along here, look at a couple of these. I don't want to take the whole time to show you all of them, but talk to you a little bit about our process. One of the things that we want to do is we want to include artists that are local and regional, national, and perhaps maybe even international. We want a wide variety of art. We want art that is permanent. We want art that is temporary, art that responds to different communities where it's located and for different stakeholders. And one of the ways we do that is we need to have a selection process that includes some of those stakeholders and some of those people that are interested in what is going into a particular space or into a particular community. So we set up a dedicated committee that includes people in stakeholders, and we take time to look at a variety of artists that apply for a particular commission, and then make that selection. And we follow through on that. Once the selection is made and the work starts, we follow through and we keep track of the projects that are ongoing. So the the newest project that we have is by this artist, Dee Dee Morrison, and she has been working with the library. Our committee that we set up had people from the library, sort of an equal mix of people from the library and folks from our commission. She's going to be unveiling an elaborately cut steel book, at least we're putting, let's put book in quotation marks. I think you're seeing that behind you there. She's going to be opening that, if you're lucky to be there, on August 31st. I think that's a Thursday at 11 o'clock. So we're looking forward to that. For our next project, we're very excited to try to make a project that includes all of Winston-Salem. It's an ambitious project. It's a project that we want to connect neighborhoods with. We want it to be inclusive. We would like to focus on portraits of us, making it a portrait of us. And it sort of has a long timeline. It's a little bit more complex than some of the other projects. And here to talk about this project in particular more is Betsy, and India will follow. And if you have questions, I think probably we'll wait till everybody is finished, and then we'll all try to answer your questions as best we can together.
I'm Betsy Towns, 328 Vintage Avenue in Winston-Salem. So David described the process of artworks that were specific to a particular location and a particular building and responsive to that building. This project is different because it aims to be citywide. And we did follow several of the same protocols that we use for selecting artworks for particular buildings. We established a subcommittee, which included members of the community and members of the Art Commission, and recognized pretty quickly that we wanted to expand that group, and ended up involving students, members of the community, arts professionals, in a process of looking at precedents of art works that had existed throughout the community in various cities and that had significant and positive impact on those cities. So upon expanding our committee, we quickly turned to looking at those precedents and recognized that the goals that we had in mind for this project were to address intersections and build bridges across communities, and that one of the ways that we saw other artists doing that very successfully was by turning to the portrait as the content of that artwork. So we focused our look at precedent projects to artists who had used portraits to involve community engagement, education, that involved many members of the community and different neighborhoods. And in our own particular case, of course, we wanted to focus on innovation, being the city of arts and innovation, to create meaningful impact and value for our community. So we turned to artists like J.R., who is a French artist who has worked throughout the world to create portraits based on individuals in the communities where he was working. So J.R. works in many different media. This one is in collaboration with another artist, and it is a temporary project and projection. Other works that he's done, here we see works in Israel and Palestine that allow people to look at the faces around them and take the time to actually see the individuality of those faces. And another piece that was done on a large scale on a public building in Philadelphia. Another artist, Fanny Aye, who created a very recent work in 2017 in New York. This is a piece that allows you to imagine people differently. So it's a piece that has 4 sections of a full-body portrait that you can spin to kind of create your own individual and see how my head might look on one of your faces, for example. So a kind of playful approach. Here, a piece by Jean Plemsa. Some of you may be familiar with this large portrait project in Millennium Park in Chicago, where projected from within the large monuments are faces of individuals, and on the ground around those projections are fountains. So you see people interacting and playing kind of inside the portraits with the fountains that exist there. So it's a real community gathering place, and in this case, a large permanent monumental sculptural work. And the final precedent is by Kent Twitchell, and in this case, the communities in LA came together to bring sections of the Berlin Wall, actually, and create portraits by artists in the community to transform the Berlin Wall into a monument that involved the history, but it also involved the immediate moment of LA and other attributes of history. So in our case, we'll be seeking an artist to create this piece for us who emphasizes community engagement, emphasizes education and innovation, and who will involve him or herself in the creation of a unique piece for the entire city. With that said, I'll turn to India to introduce the value of a portrait object.
So India Beale, 5509 Pinebrook Lane. So I'm going to talk about just briefly about why photography. We have a portrait of Walker Evans, who was very instrumental during the Great Depression, photographing the invisible, showing faces that hadn't been seen before. At a time where we didn't have television or Instagram, you had an opportunity to see the faces of individuals going through these struggles. So the idea that the portrait can talk more about a person, seeing their soul, seeing what it means to be a part of Winston-Salem, but also what it means to be an American. And so then we have the artist June Lee, who's a contemporary version, I would say, of a Walker Evans, but uses photography as a social platform to talk about the change and identity of African-American men. So the photograph can be more than just an image. It can exist online. So for June Lee's instance, he has exhibitions across the United States, an Instagram page that has over 75,000 followers. He has a book. He also has classes and programs. So we're not just thinking about the idea of a photograph representing Winston-Salem and the individuals who live here, but how can we take this to a more larger kind of global scale and take Winston-Salem to the next level by showing not only our citizens, but the greatness of our community. And so together, the photograph becomes more than just this kind of two-dimensional object. It becomes a way of reimagining our city in a way that we've never thought of before. So we're going to end with questions, if you all have any questions about the project.
Committee, Councilmember Clark.
I have seen the one in Chicago. My son lives there, and I've actually put my foot in the water there. It's very nice. Two comments. One, are we looking for an artist or artist?
An artist or artist team who would come and engage the city in creating this work.
Okay. Number two, would this be a permanent exhibit or temporary?
That is not at the forefront to determine that right now.
Okay.
It could be either. It really depends on a lot on what the artist would propose.
Okay. And the last question, or just a comment, I would certainly encourage you to use local artists as much as you can, because they're part of the community. They're the ones helping pay for it. So I'm a firm believer in buying local. Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Councilmember Adams, Councilmember Bessie.
Thank you for the work you've put into this. It's been a long time overdue here in Winston, but just as we create Innovation Quarter and revitalize other parts of our community, this is just another piece that we had to plan to get to, much like Creative Corridors. I'm hoping, I know we voted on it, we passed it, we got some money, but going back to Councilmember Clark, we can be very tight on the pocketbook. We might put some money over here in a bucket, but by the time the folk that want the money, we have vetted it so many times that it might be some changes that you didn't see coming. So my thing is to try to make this as cost effective. And as you've already said, inclusion of the community at large and other spaces and places that could use this type of revitalization, particularly areas that the city taxpayers have already invested their money. One more thing, like Councilmember Clark, anytime we use city taxpayers for anything, money for this, we would prefer that we use our own. Again, we're a city of arts, and we got lots to show for it, schools, our children, our youth, our experienced artists, much like what we have at the convention center. So we'd like you to keep that in mind. I personally may not be so willing to vote on anything that's, they might have to copy somebody's famous work, but I can't support if we have to spend the money on somebody else outside of Winston-Salem. That's me.
Councilman Bessie.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an interesting concept. The portraiture, community portraiture approach does sound interesting, and like you could do something worthwhile with it. I would note that you're talking about spending the totality of 4 years city contribution to the fund on a single project. So that would kind of wipe you out for a while.
That means y'all gotta go get your money.
Unless you drew in matching grants from other sources.
It's worth noting that this project is going to take quite a bit of time to do. It unfolds over time. So Kelly actually probably has some of the figures that reveal that we will have money at the end of this. So,
looking at the budget, Councilmember Bessie, if this project went forward at the budget requested, it would, and there was still an allocation of $50,000 a year, the Public Art Commission would still have more than $200,000 by the time this project was spent to work on other projects in those intervening years.
So you're thinking one big project every 4 years as a model?
Well, no, but this, as it's proposed, it would have a downtown presence and neighborhood presence. So it's really multiple faces on one project. In 9 to 25 different sites around the city.
Yeah, I was saying I listened to the presentation as you described it. It seems like a worthwhile approach and would have multiple site impacts, but it's a bunch of years in the same basket. Anyway, just a comment for your consideration.
Councilman Clark.
Just one more thing. I do travel to a lot of big cities, and I would certainly encourage you to look because, for example, in Chicago, right beside that you showed is the Bean, which is a very interesting piece of art, and around the corner is Picasso's structure at City Hall in Chicago. So go to Philadelphia, they got the giant clothespin. They also have a lot of murals in Philadelphia painted on the sides of older buildings, things of that sort. So there's I challenge you to look at everything and see what seems to work. Thank you.
All right. Again, thank you all. This item was just for information, correct? It was.
Right. Yep.
Mr. City Manager.
Chairman Montgomery, this month is for information, but council, if you want to proceed, we'll have to bring back a budget amendment to actually appropriate the funds.
Okay. And is there a timeline that exists?
The commission was looking to send out an RFQ this fall.
With that being said, I don't hear an objection from the committee of looking at this. I guess if we bring something back around to examine it, I think the only thing we heard is just to be cautious on the fact that it is the full appropriation at this time. So during that time, there may not be other considerations of other art projects. That's kind of what I've heard. Councilman McIntosh?
It's maybe a little late to ask, but so are we sending them away saying, bring us the best $200,000 art project you can bring us, or are we saying spend $200,000 on local artists? To me, those two things may not be complementary.
Well, I don't think that the commission to the commission was to just spend the $200,000. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, if I hear this was a presentation based upon over a period of time to examine this particular project, with the understanding that the committee has stated very clearly that we want to see local artists as a part of that. Is that, because I don't totally understand the question.
Are we putting limits around what artists they can utilize for the project?
I think that's incumbent upon the council.
That's me. I'm just one of 4 and one of 8, but that is me. Yeah. Again, we like to talk about how great we are with our art, Stevens Center and School of the Arts and all this other stuff we do. All the great creations we've already created downtown. We got great organizations that can work in tandem with them, like Creative Quarters and Arts on Liberty Street, that can all come together and try to make this work some kind of way, where there's some collaboration just for comment's sake. But by the time they bring us something, again, I'm just a proponent. We got to be able to spend this money. It's the citizens' money.
Ms. Bill, did you have a...
So I was going to say, and I totally, as a local artist, I completely respect that 100%. I think we want to definitely uplift our local artists and have an opportunity for them to show their expertise while marrying that with a national kind of global conversation. So as a local artist myself, being able to kind of have a conversation with Zun Lee, who's based out of Canada, and kind of talk about the collaboration between the two. So I think with this project, it's not just about uplifting the local artists, but also giving our local artists exposure to international recognition and giving them opportunity to have exposure to international artists all over so that their network can grow outside of just Winston-Salem, becomes North Carolina. For instance, Durham, North Carolina has, this is our competitors, I would say, Durham, North Carolina, or even Greensboro, for that matter, are rolling out some major public art projects right now as we speak, with gallery wraps going across, making their city these kind of inviting places where you can come in and feel like you're in Durham and experience it to the next level. We want to be able to compete on that level and bring artists from all over so that our artists here in Winston-Salem can get a chance to have that exposure. So it's one thing to think about it locally, but I want, as a local artist, to have a chance to see everyone kind of interact with international artists. So maybe you're doing something in Japan that's very similar that's happening in Winston, that we can marry those conversations together. So I think this project has so many different levels to it, and with those different layers, it allows our artists the opportunity to get that exposure that they wouldn't get otherwise.
And we're not disagreeing with you all. We're just saying that just like when we pass a bond or we come up with a project, our budget, we have to take this to our citizens so they can agree with us on this. Again, when you talk about as many local minority artists that we have in our communities, again, that's why I have to back up and say, I want them to have that exposure. You know, I feel you, I got you, but you got to know where we are. We have to go back. You have to go to the communities. We got to have public hearings so that we undoubtedly know that they are okay with the direction of their money going, whether this person is a consultant in Japan or Canada. I don't care. But I have to be sure that my citizens have buy-in, the people that elected me. Because if they say no, then it's no. Now, if we can do Skype conferences or bring them in and somebody else, rentals or somebody, public-private partnerships, help to sponsor them to come and help give input or engage our local artists, I'm all for that. But again, the bottom line is we represent the community trust fund. And therefore, we have lots of people that come and want to do things, but at the end of the day, it's up to staff and us to make sure we hear the voices of the people whose money is in the trust. That's all we're saying.
What may be helpful in terms of what comes back around is to kind of maybe lay out some more specifics on the type of artists, where, you know, in those conversations, who and how many spaces may be available for each in whatever's decided. And that, I think that may help paint a more clear picture for folks in terms of what we're looking at from local as opposed to others in the community, if that's possible.
I say typically what we want to do is get the best person for the job.
I got you.
I don't care where they come from.
I got you, but you also need to hear the committee on that one as well. In terms of
we want to rise up. We want to get the best. So our process is directed towards that, and we will. We would like to have the process where we have stakeholders involved, and they would be from all over the city of Winston-Salem. So
okay, I got you on that one. And just again, I just say make sure you take in consideration the comments today, because I think you had probably a not so objection at the beginning, and maybe it leads in the process. Right. Councilmember Larson, then Bessie, and then we'll...
Okay, I've got to weigh in here a little bit. First of all, thank you, and thank you for the commission for your diligence in trying to bring art to the community at large. I think the Benson project was excellent, and I appreciate your efforts there. I appreciate the initiative here to take it out into the community, to places that everybody that can't get into the convention center for whatever reason hopefully will engage on a personal level. I really like that concept. I've seen the bean. I like the faces. I think that's a great opportunity to make it relevant and make it personal and make it local, which is what I think we're trying to do here. I have some opinions, obviously, and one is that it's not all about a one-dimensional art. We need to remember that there's statuaries and there's other forms that I think that we need to decorate the city with. Second of all, I like art that we can invest in and retain, that it becomes part of our culture, through time, and whether it's curated or whether it remains in public view is something for us to consider as we go along in this. So it's a cumulative process of art development. As far as local, we do have a great number of local people. I've talked to them. You know them. It's your business, and I'm sure you will represent their interest well, as you have said. But there is a stimulation, and there is something about Winston-Salem that we've always strived to be the best. And if we need to bring in excellent people, whether they be the designers of the Reynolds Building from New York City, or whether it's some other aspect of landscape design that we've relied on outside expertise to give us the quality experience to give to our citizens the best product possible, which is also a gift to the city. And I do believe that that's worthy of consideration, as well as fostering our own people. I have confidence that you will be able to do that. I wish you luck, and I'm willing to support this project.
All right, Councilmember Bessie.
Does your concept anticipate a single artist who is responsible for the base of all the work? Or are you anticipating the collaboration of multiple artists in producing the photographic work and painting it?
I have a kind of twofold answer, and others may have other answers, but I see the making of a portrait as a collaboration between the photographer and the subject. And so, in a way, thinking about this project, every person photographed would be here. But we are certainly thinking about an artist or artist team leading the community in an educational process about public art and about photography.
Okay. So if you're talking about one person, please keep in mind that I hear some of my colleagues saying flatly that they will stipulate the project doesn't get their vote of approval unless it is a local artist, unless you are restricting your artist to a local person. You know, recognizing the benefits of the collaboration and, you know, getting the contacts and all, there's a condition for folks. And it could turn out to be a majority condition on the council. So please give some thought. And I don't know, I'm not an artist. But
you wear the same tie every day. We know.
Yeah.
I've got a half dozen ties now. I sleep
married life helps.
Once a year.
Yeah, married life helps.
Just as a thought, you might give some thought to a multiple artist. Just purely
and just for the sake of time, Councilmember Clark.
Real quick, I'm not putting any restrictions. I will evaluate it in its totality, and I'm probably the last person in town to. I'm not a creative person, but I look forward to what you present. And just for the record, everybody know, Mr. Bessie got married this week. I just want to publicly congratulate him.
About time.
And I look forward to his new ties.
All right. With that said, I think city managers heard some comments, and we can have some further engagement as we move forward to bring something back around to take in consideration the comments that have been shared today. Okay? All right. Thank you all so much for your presentation. Look forward to what comes forward.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right.
Good.
Item G2. The item everyone's been waiting for.
Item G2, an ordinance amending Chapter 38, Article 1 of the Winston-Salem City Code regarding malt beverages, unfortified wine, fortified wine, and mixed beverages on Sunday mornings.
All right. Who has this item?
It's mine. Consistent with the legislation that was recently enacted by the General Assembly, amending the ABC laws, this ordinance will permit, if adopted, any establishment located within the city limits and holding an ABC permit issued pursuant to GS 18B 1001 to sell malt beverages, unfortified wine, fortified wine, and mixed beverages beginning at 10 a.m. on Sundays, consistent with that permit. So basically, this puts into effect the session law that was passed recently.
All right.
Answer any questions.
Simple amendment here. Are there questions?
I'll move approval.
Make a motion. Has been moved and properly second. There any questions on the floor? Hearing none, when it shows on your screen, those who are able will vote. Well, that's sir, that's out of order at the moment, but we'll get you in just a second. Yeah. Okay. Before we take a vote.
Yeah.
Councilmember.
Just wanted to say that not unfortunate, but we got it done. I know everybody else got theirs in before we did, but they didn't take August off like we did. But every time, July, every time the media, as a matter of fact, they called me just now, want to know when are we voting on this item tonight. And I told them we're doing it right now, and they're probably watching it on 13, and that we'll be voting, the council will be voting on it on Monday night. But I think it's long overdue, like most people have said. I really think it's long overdue that North Carolina can at least say we finally got to the 21st century on an ABC permit.
All right. And there's a motion and a second on the floor. And this was not publicized as a public hearing, and so I do want to respect folks' time who did come out to be present. And so, is it Mr. Hutchinson? Is it, again, it wasn't a public hearing for the item, which means that it wasn't a time set aside for public dialogue and conversation in the committee itself. But I would yield to my colleagues on the committee if they would open the opportunity for you to come since you came. You can come.
I'm sorry for being out of order. I signed this. I never saw it.
3 minutes, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Give your name and address for the record.
Robert Hutchins, 1974 Longburn Drive. I actually live in the East Ward. The church that I pastor meets in the Southeast Ward. And congratulations, Mr. Bessie.
Thank you.
And but anyhow, I feel like our General Assembly made a huge mistake with this. And it's not what you might think I'm going to be coming from. Obviously, I look at the history of the towns of Salem and Winston. They were God-fearing people, and they reverence Sunday as the Lord's Day. For those reasons, obviously, I think it's a mistake. But my whole issue is public safety. Sunday's unique from the rest of the week. Most people work till, say, 5, Monday through Friday. And if they drink, it's going to be limited. When we give people 2 more hours to drink on Sunday, it is going to put impaired drivers on the road. There's no doubt about this. You give people that much more time to drink, and people's lives are going to be in jeopardy. Drinking and driving is a huge problem in our city. We've had some of our best people in this city killed or maimed from people that are driving impaired. Also, there's a situation that we had with Tiger Woods, and there's so many issues today with this. Now, the 2 things that I hear from people are increased revenue. But I feel like if you look at what a business makes on a week, the little bit more money they'll make for those extra alcohol sales in 2 hours is not that big of a deal. And then people talk about convenience. I have many friends that are out of church, and they've always felt like, well, Sunday morning is the Lord's time for church. It's never really been that big of an issue till people start talking about making the money. But is putting public citizens' lives in danger worth the extra money? I don't think so. This is going to cause more impaired drivers, and they might not be blowing the .08, but buzz driving is impaired driving. And I think that's going to be an issue for people that's out on the roads late Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, and that's my concern, and I really appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you
for your comments. All right. There is Mr. Bessie, did you have
Just a general comment. I appreciate the Reverend's concern. I'm not aware of any study that would collaborate the 2 extra hours of beverage sale on Sunday morning with an increase in incidents of drunk driving. If there is any such, I'd be happy to look at it, but I'm unaware of any evidence of that.
With that said, there is a motion and by Robert Clark and a second by Denise Adams to move this forward to full council. Those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no.
And this will be moved forward to the council.
Right, and this will, that's unanimous. That means this item goes to the full council for its vote on Monday night, and that is the second meeting of the council, and thus there will be public comment at the end of that meeting. And then this is not, again, on Monday. We'll not have a public hearing prior to the vote on this item. All right. Item G3.
Item G3, ordinance amending Chapter B of the Unified Development Ordinance to amend regulations for accessory dwellings, UDO 267. Proposer of the City County Planning and Development Serving Staff, recommended by Planning Board. Item continued from the May, August, October, November, December 2016, and the January 2017 Community Development Housing General Government Committee.
Good afternoon, council members. Again, just to give you a little bit of background on this, since you all haven't heard from us in a while on accessory dwelling units, put you all on the same page. But accessory dwellings are small residential units that may either be attached to or detached from the principal residential structure on the lot. They've existed in the Unified Development Ordinance since its adoption in 1994, and in the prior zoning ordinances of Winston-Salem since the 1930s, and are common in other cities. Looks like we're not showing on the screen. Thanks.
There you go.
Okay. These units can be found in older neighborhoods near downtown Winston-Salem, as well as in the more outlying areas of the city and Forsyth County. And they provide more diverse, affordable housing options for many people at different stages of life. As you recall, the city has had discussions on amending the current accessory dwelling regulations since August of 2015, so 2 years ago, since the present requirements concerning who may occupy a unit were determined to not conform with current North Carolina case law. Following the August 2015 meeting, planning staff had public input sessions and then proposed a text amendment allowing accessory dwelling units with a number of restrictions and a requirement for detached units to get a permit from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. After public hearings and much discussion of different options, the Planning Board ultimately recommended simply removing the kinship requirements from the current ADU regulations. The Council Committee has, for over the last year, been discussing varying approaches to allowing, not allowing, or restricting in one way or another accessory dwelling units. When we last spoke with the committee about this in January of this year, you all asked staff to put together a quote-unquote consensus version of the ordinance, including standards at least some council members appeared to agree upon. We couldn't ascertain anything that represented a true consensus, meaning every single member of the committee and some of the other council members who participated in discussions uniformly agreed upon. But what we were able to come up with was something that we thought most of the committee members supported in various comments, and I just want to go over that now before you all have your discussion. The first point is dealing with review process. In this draft, detached accessory units would be reviewed by the council via special use district zoning. So that would allow each property to be voted on individually by the council, and there would be a public hearing and a legislative review process. As far as attached units go, those would still be approved via the staff zoning permit process as in the current ordinance. There was a lot of discussion on minimum lot size for detached units at previous meetings. We heard general support for 9,000 square feet, but again, that's not set in stone going forward. Similarly, maximum unit size, we heard 800 square feet to be a good number, but also having a provision that no more than 5% of lot area would be allowed for detached units. And what that means is, for example, in a neighborhood that has standard RS9, 9,000 square foot zoning on a lot, they would actually only be able to do 450 square foot in those neighborhoods, and you'd need a size of 16,000 square feet for your lot to have that maximum 5% and 800 square foot met. Also, attached units would be allowed to be 30% of the size of principal units. As far as more suburban areas go, on large lots, 1,500 square foot units would be allowed there. And in principal residences in the future growth in rural areas would have to be larger than the accessory dwelling. But aside from the ADU being smaller than the principal residence, that would be the only size requirement for those units. As far as parking, one off-street space would be required per accessory unit bedroom, but in no case less than one space per unit if someone did a studio type situation that didn't have a formal bedroom. Setback requirements was another area that the committee had a lot of discussion on recently. This draft proposes that side and rear setbacks would be equal to the principal residence setbacks for the zoning district, except that rear setbacks could be reduced in half where one of 5 situations is present. And those would be where the ADU is either adjacent to property not zoned single family, where the unit is adjacent to undeveloped property, where the unit's adjacent to property which already has an accessory dwelling on it, where the accessory unit will be under 14 feet tall, so basically a single-family home, single-story single-family home height, or a 5-foot wide buffer yard could be installed between the accessory unit and the property line to screen the impact of the unit from neighbors. Lastly, maximum height, detached accessory units would be no taller than the principal residence on the lot, but in no case taller than 24 feet. So this is another area where the current draft has further constricted things from previous versions of the ordinance we've talked to the committee about. So just a couple more points. Based on committee concerns in past meetings, this consensus draft also clarifies that external stairways for attached units may not be visible from any public street, and the draft also includes an added provision that a second front building entrance may not be developed or used to access attached accessory dwelling units. These changes are brought in order to help narrow down your discussion on these accessory dwelling regulations, and obviously further refinement can be made by the committee, and I'm glad to answer any questions you have.
All right, with that being said, are there questions from the committee? Councilmember Clark?
I read all this in detail. What you're proposing, UDO 267, does it have all this stuff or simply have taken out the kinship issue? Or does it have all these other things in it?
Well, the version approved ultimately by the planning board on a split vote simply kept the current accessory dwelling unit provisions and took out the legal concern of the kinship provisions.
Right. Okay. Do you have somewhere in here an alternative one that includes all these other things?
There should be a version in your packet that's titled, let me see what this title is. It's titled
Modified Staff
Planning Staff
Okay.
Proposal Recommended for Denial by Planning.
Okay. All right. And last question, and then I'll make a comment. I don't know who to address this to. How many, I'll say detached, because I think those are more visible, detached units are built each year in this city? Detached, yes.
We did some research on that, and since we stopped enforcing the kinship provision in, I believe it was summer of 2013 or so, we've approved 14 accessory units. So we're not talking about more than a handful of detached units built each year.
So that's 3 or 4 years.
Roughly.
My last comment, and you mentioned so many, I can't remember them all, but I think if you put the 5% in, you're going to pretty much kill it, because no one's going to build a 450 square foot detached building. That's just so small. This certainly sounds like a horse designed by a committee. I think you end up with a donkey or something when you do that. So much. I mean, we're going to get the Bureaucracy of the Year award probably internationally if we adopt everything you mentioned. It is just going to be so darn complicated. I think this is a problem, a solution in search of a problem. I just can't imagine anybody retroactively spending tens of thousands of dollars for a 450-foot studio in the back of their house. They got to run water, sewer, electricity out there, build a parking space, and all that. The current problem is we're going to make criminals out of a lot of people that live in West End and Buena Vista and everywhere else that have these. They were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or whenever. It just seemed like to me, and maybe we can't do it because we haven't been able to, it's just to come up with a few things. I think the square footage at 800 narrows it down a lot. Come in with a standard setback, maybe it's half whatever the normal is, and a 25-foot maximum height or something. I just think 2 or 3 things would take care of it, but all this other stuff just, I mean, if you don't want any of them, just vote no, as opposed to clobbering them with an encyclopedia, is what we're doing. Anyway, my thoughts.
Councilmember Adams?
I think the intent at first, Councilman Clark, I think we've been beating this one for what, about 2 years now?
2 years.
I think the intent initially was to try to prevent accessory dwellings or buildings in the neighborhoods of Ardmore or Old Salem or something to that effect. Because as you said, in some of the other neighborhoods, off of Stratford, Buena Vista, and those types, Sherwood, they have these houses in the West End because that's the way it was. They were servant quarters, slave quarters, whatever you want to call it, but that's, and family that came, but mostly it was that. My thing about this from the very beginning, and I've been on this committee since I got elected, is I'm a big proponent of tiny houses. And I don't know how, how we got, all I was interested in was ensuring that we have or come and create later an ordinance that allows us, people, to have tiny house neighborhoods. Charlotte is doing it. Asheville is doing it. Raleigh-Durham is doing it. Chapel Hill. Winston-Salem, and Kurt and Ms. Paul will eventually get there because I'm going to be asking you guys. Go benchmark them, find out what we need to do, Because when you talk about affordable housing, which is Councilmember Montgomery's, one of his pet peeves, we got to figure out, and that's what they're doing, how do we beat that and provide affordable, livable, clean, decent housing for the taxpayers of the city of Winston-Salem that cannot afford and do not want a 1,000 square foot house with a $1,000 mortgage or rent. So that's my thing about it, Mr. Clark. I mean, Councilmember Clark. For my neighborhoods, as I've always said, again, you got to remember our neighborhoods are different. And we just want them to be able, if we got to put mama in the backyard in a little cabin or house, then we need to be able to do that with as less cost to us as possible. Because the way our cultures are, whether African Americans, we keep mama and grandmama and everybody at the house until it's a done deal, because we all share in the caretaking of that individual. We don't have the resources to go to homes and things like that. Home is where home is, and it's in our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Councilmember Bessie.
Yeah, the original intent of the accessory dwelling ordinance before the court case that resulted in legal advice to us that we couldn't enforce it anymore was to restrict it to families. You know, precisely the kind of situation that Councilman Adams is talking about. None of the alternatives in front of us do that, nor legally can do that.
Correct.
So we should not operate on the fiction that that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We are talking about standards for when and how you are permitted to turn a single-family zoned lot into an effective duplex.
Mm-hmm.
We're not seeing a great many specific cases a year in which these are coming forward, even under the current situation of very little standard enforcement. I would suggest that there is no practical reason that we could not do a special use zone for each of those 14 cases that we have seen in the last how many years?
Since 3.5 years or so, roughly.
3.5 years. I mean, with that average of that many places a year, we as the council can review and hear if there are problems from neighbors and neighborhoods, and if not, it meets the standards, check off on it. My suggestion is simply to take the standards, and I hear Councilmember Clark's, horse created by committee. Well, sometimes when the example that was used in the classic cliche there was a camel. Well, if you take a horse out in the desert, it's going to die a lot faster than a camel. Camel fits its environment. This may not be as pretty as a racehorse, but it may be what would fit our environment, as long as we give ourselves not the situation where anybody can do it regardless of the neighborhood situation as a matter of right through the very rote process of the Board of Adjustment, but simply to give the neighborhood, the neighbors that are impacted, the opportunity to comment on it. And if in that individual case it meets the reasonable test, it gets approved. I would, at an appropriate point, I would move approval of the standards that are in here with the change that we don't differentiate between attached and detached, but simply do the special use zoning for each of the cases.
Councilmember McIntosh and then Larson.
I've been on both sides of this. I mean, Susan and I have converted half a dozen houses back from rooming houses or duplex or triplexes back to single-family homes in years gone by. I think we're talking about fighting a war, or the last war. I think what we're facing with now is neighborhoods that people want to live in that they can't afford to live in. And this definitely improves affordability. And healthy cities around the country have loosened their laws and have benefited from it. I think the amount of consternation about what will happen is probably not what will happen. I think that the economics of it are, you're not going to see people going out and doing this left and right. We're still going to be talking about a small amount of cases. But on a 9,000 square foot lot, that 450 square foot building, That's a 21-foot by 21-foot building. Most of our living rooms are close to that. So we are severely limiting people's options to do this. So again, we're not saying you can't do it. We're not saying you can't do it because we don't want auxiliary dwelling units. We're going to say you can't do it because you can't build a practical property or a dwelling on your property. And if you look at the list of cities in North Carolina that just allow it by right, it's pretty significant. I mean, Raleigh is really, Chapel Hill is a special case. Chapel Hill always is. And Raleigh always is kind of a special case. So of the other cities, they're much more lenient, much more lax. I think this is a way to give a lot more people the ability to live downtown, to stay in a home, to build equity, to build wealth, than if we shut this down. If we're only going to allow 14, the way we're going to end up with 1 or 2 or 3 a year, and we're not going to increase the ability of people to do this. If anything, I think we're going to decrease it. And I think that's a mistake long run. Every time we say, no, you can't increase the density downtown or in the inner core, you're telling people to move out, and you're increasing sprawl. If we're going to grow, those people got to go somewhere. I would rather see them living in a denser urban environment where we already have services and schools and not go into greenfields. I think this is a much too restrictive set of plans here.
Councilmember Larson.
In the 1920s and even earlier, neighborhoods were created in Winston-Salem. And they were designed with lot sizes and road sides to accommodate a single-family dwelling unit. And what we're suggesting under this scenario is to basically throw on top of that a whole new category, really, of as you said, duplex zoning without rezoning the lots. We're going to increase auto density. We're going to create population density. We already have the option of taking certain houses and dividing them up into 4 units under current zoning. We're now going to throw another building in the back of these buildings and have 5 occupants living on one lot, and all of them have cars. And we don't have the infrastructure, and we don't have the driveways, and we don't have the neighborhoods to support it, and it devalues the neighbors' properties next door. One of the specific questions I had about the parking requirements, I've got a series of individual questions, but philosophically, I think I would agree with Councilmember Bessie in that they need review on a case-by-case basis, and I would not differentiate between an attached and an unattached accessory dwelling, because in fact they both impact the neighborhood in a variety of ways, and they both impact the value of adjacent properties. So I think that we need to reconsider it and make it uniform. If you want consistency, we can make consistency in these kinds of additions. In dealing with specifically with some concerns that I had in looking at the actual ordinance, which I assume is where we are right now, I have some very specific questions, which could I bring up at this point for discussion? Yeah. The idea then of the differentiation between the two has already been raised, and I don't see why we're differentiating between detached and undetached. Regarding the parking question, I think we say one space for an additional building, for an auxiliary building. A lot of these houses already have a garage, already have a driveway, and they accommodate 1 car. Now, is that 1 car for the house now going to end up out on the street, or is this an additional parking lot for the auxiliary building? And we don't really differentiate that right now. We say 1 parking space for the auxiliary building, or the additional building. And I think we need to be very clear in our language that we're not just taking the resident's car and putting it out on the street, and we're taking that space and now we're designating that. And I don't see any real clear guidance on that matter. Regarding setbacks, and I would yield to some of my colleagues on this, but alleys are an important part of our landscape, and I've been spending some time thinking about alleys. And certainly historically we see these outbuildings in direct relationship to alleys. And as you look at your conditions, the 4 or 5 conditions that you've had on placement, I don't see alleys being recognized as a landscape feature that would allow us to move those buildings back closer to the alley, perhaps, than where we're currently suggesting that they be located. I do have some questions about this sort of square footage requirements and why we're letting suburban areas, have houses that are as big as the houses that are on the lot. I don't, and I'm a more or less urban person, so I don't really know the ramifications of growth areas 1, 2, and 3. But it sounds to me like we're setting up a situation on the outer edges where we are in the county, probably really subdividing lots again and putting large structures on them that are equal to the primary dwelling on the lot itself. And that seems to be a subdivision of the lot, and I don't understand legally how we're doing that without a rezoning. Those are some questions, I guess, that I have on it. Mostly I'm concerned about what the impact of these houses. You seem to have done a good job. I asked earlier about mailboxes and some things like that. Are we still thinking this is going to be separate addresses, U.S. mail addresses, or is it all going to be handled? I know the utilities are all under one bill and one structure sort of approach, but are we remailing addresses on all of these auxiliary locations?
We talked to, you may recall, the addressing coordinator for Forsyth County before a few meetings ago, and if it's a detached unit, their policy is that it has to have a separate physical address for EMS and other health and safety purposes. Now, if it's an attached structure in the same building, then it would have just the same address, and it might say unit 120A, 120B, things on that nature, but it would, as you mentioned, have one mailbox and things of that nature per the ordinance.
So we're creating a whole new structure of residential occupancy. When Grandma was occupying the outbuilding in the backyard, you know, we didn't have new addresses for her. That was not part. If we had servants' quarters, garages, studios above garages, they were not a new systematic address. When we start establishing formality of separate occupancies and basically disconnected. Part of my big concern here is absentee landlords and the idea of stacking up, you know, houses with absentee landlords with multiple addresses, multiple occupants with limited controls on it. And we can review that under what Councilman Bessie's talking about. But they need pretty tight control. Right now, I just see the opportunity to throw another rental unit on top of already rental units that are being created by absentee landlords.
Councilmember Larson, if I could go back and just address one direct question that you had regarding parking and the allocation of parking between the principal residence on the lot and the accessory unit. That would be required to be shown on the special use zoning site plan of how they would be satisfying their parking requirements for the principal residence and the accessory building. And if that wasn't found to be satisfactory through the council or the planning board as they reviewed it, those tweaks could be made by saying you have to move your parking space here so that ingress and egress of this other space can take place or things of that nature. But that is supposed to be delineated on the site plan.
All right. With that, I want to kind of bring us back around from a summary, because what it sounds like, one, that I do not believe in hearing from the committee, at least, that there is enough votes tonight to move what exists here forward. I also do not believe that there will be enough votes to move this item if it were to go forward by a whole of council that will make vote number 5 by the mayor to put this in one direction or another, because I think that there's a split in terms of where this is. My opinion on this actually leans with the majority of individuals who've spoken this evening, in the sense of believing that this is too restrictive in where it lies. And so my request to staff will be particularly to bring us back a skinny version. Hopefully we can pass a skinny version of something in terms of removing some of in terms of the restrictions that exist here, particularly one item that I think is interesting in terms of the rezoning piece that will come to council itself, in terms of requiring that item to come to council for it to be rezoned itself. Hopefully that may give some council members who may not like the lesser restrictive version the opportunity to engage with that and then basically see what the community has to say about that particular property. But I think the restrictions as they are now should likely be taken away, particularly taking what the planning board moved forward with. Some of the specific items that were brought may be more advantageous in terms of what we're looking at, with the requirement that it does require an actual rezoning that will come to council for that action. And to me, in terms of hearing from folks tonight, that appears to be, at least for those present in this conversation, much more something that would actually be viable and something that would actually be practical in its in action. I know that others have some varying differences, but I'm trying to get to a place where it actually is a consensus of majority of folks in a particular direction on this. And I know there are a couple others. I know Councilmember Clark asked to be recognized prior to my comments, and I go to Bessie and Larson.
To the attorney, right now we are enforcing what's on the books less the mother-in-law requirement. So if we do nothing, and it may well be what we've done for 2 years, we're doing UDO 267, which is simply removing the requirement that the person be a blood relative or a live-in person. So is that public knowledge that we're not enforcing that?
For those folks who are interested in accessory dwellings, I think that is the case. I think the staff and members of the zoning board just have trouble moving forward with something when the ordinance says something different. In other words, they feel like they're moving contrary to the ordinance, so they feel like it really needs to be cleaned up. So what I'm saying is, at a minimum, maybe you should just take the kinship provision out as recommended and work on the other things over time. But
and I would say, I would be willing to make a motion to approve UDO 267, which is what we're actually doing today and have been doing for a while. And it should become public information, because I see the paper in the back of the room, that we're not enforcing that portion of it. And I think, and this may be like Obamacare, if you rescind it, maybe it'll force us to do something. Because right now, for you folks that want something, this encyclopedia of requirements, right now, that is what we're doing, UDO 267. We've got the current ordinance less, you can't restrict it to your mother-in-law. And I have no trouble having our current ordinances match what we are in fact doing. But I don't know what my other folks want. But I don't see anything happening here, because
Is that a motion?
I'll make that a motion.
Second.
UDO 267 as sent forward from the planning.
You got to mash them.
And then,
Mr. Chairman, if I just clarify, when Councilmember Clark says UDO 267, what he's talking about is the planning board's recommended version.
Yes. And I made that motion, and she seconded it.
Mr. Bessie?
Yes. I wondered if the chair was suggesting a rewrite that would remove or loosen some of the specific restrictions, but require that to go before the council on a case-by-case basis. Did I hear that correctly?
Specifically, it was to remove pretty much the essence of what came from the planning board, with the addition of a council review and requirement.
Yeah, I am certainly willing to discuss personally that kind of alternative. I would suggest that the majority of the committee determines to move forward to simply pull out the restriction and add nothing, that you will see a vigorous pushback from a number of neighborhoods.
Ms. Bessie, that's what we're doing now.
I hear you. However, I think that similarly to the national case, simply removing what's there and saying we'll get around to fixing it will result in a wave of outrage.
I'm not removing. What's there is no longer there. The court struck it down. I'm simply saying, why don't we adopt what in fact we're doing?
And in part because there continues to be legal uncertainty regarding that should a contested case arise under the current ordinance.
Councilman McIntosh?
The remedy to neighborhoods is the NCO. So individual neighborhoods, as a neighborhood group, do not want to have this. They can build that into an NCO, just like other provisions in NCOs are done. So there is remedy for a neighborhood that says we don't want this.
That's a difficult.
Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, that's a difficult task. And if I can address Councilmember Clark for just a moment, the landscape changed as soon as they said we're no longer enforce the mother-in-law, the grandmother clause, and open it up basically to any occupant. Then you suddenly have a situation where you don't necessarily have owner-occupied. You have development potentials for income production. You have a variety of pressures to put occupants in spaces that traditionally had been restricted and controlled by the owner of that property on the site. And I think that the guidelines that are being written are trying to address some of the design concerns, density concerns, operational concerns that are now in play because the restrictions that had been there under the occupancy law, which was now, it was really a matter of occupancy, who can stay in these places, has now been removed. So I would agree with the chairman, not that I can vote, but if council is going to review both the accessory aspects of detached and attached, and we're going to get a chance to look at those, and individual council members in their individual wards and their neighborhoods that they got to be accountable to have a chance to review these things on a case-by-case basis, then I think that that's an operational aspect that we can work with, and maybe remove some of the confusion and static that's coming around all of these other little aspects that are coming up. And I don't know how Councilman Bessie, but I do feel that there needs to be some oversight on this. And I think your proposal probably is a good one to go back and look at it that way.
Councilman Clark. I'm not proposing anything. I'm simply suggesting we say what we do. And what I've heard the staff say is that the courts threw this out, it's gone legally, and nobody is knocking on our door wanting to do these things. You said you've done 14 in 3.5 years?
Yes, sir.
What is that, 3 a year, 3 1/3 a year, something like that? That's what's happening now with what we have in place.
And so
where is this rash? Where are all these people that want to turn Ardmore into an RS 4500? They certainly haven't come out of the woodwork, and you folks seem to think I'm proposing some monster here. It is what we are doing, and if we don't do anything else, we will continue to do it. And Mr. Bessie, I would be very surprised if a court would uphold segregated neighborhoods, and that's why this was put in.
This is not a matter of segregated neighborhoods, Mr. Clark.
Well,
I
don't have any black people in my family, so if it's related to my kin, yes, it is.
What is he talking?
What are we talking about here?
What I'm talking about.
Point of order. There is a motion on the floor as it stands now. I would ask the attorney specifically a question in reference to what was raised around the actual requirement of a zoning piece to be added to that. If that was added, what language is associated with that would be necessary to require for this item from a zoning standpoint?
It probably would not be a lot of language. If you want to hold it under committee for one more month, if you want to, we can probably bring you something back in September.
That is not necessarily my my desire at this moment, and I don't want to push something forward just out of the expediency of time. But I think for 2 years, and we're back at zero in terms of the language that exists here.
Try to work on something over the next couple of days and give you an update.
That would be my preference in terms of what we would move forward as it stands now for the motion. And then if there's language to be added, that we can look at that in terms of some addition to it at council. All right, there is a motion. Councilman Bessie.
Question for council. The case which has been the basis of the determination that the existing restrictions are no longer enforceable, was that a North Carolina Supreme Court decision?
I don't remember if the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. Mr. Contis can probably tell you off the top of it.
Good evening. It was a Court of Appeals decision.
And was it by panel or en banc?
I believe by panel.
By panel. So 3 members of the Court of Appeals made a decision, which was not successfully appealed to the Supreme Court.
That's my understanding.
And in what year?
I believe it was 2009.
We've had a radical turnover in membership of the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. This matter was never taken up by the Supreme Court. I think it would be a risk for anyone in a contested situation to work on the assumption that this will be upheld as no longer enforceable in any regard.
All right.
Therefore, I would submit that it is a substantive action to do what has been moved and seconded here.
2009.
All right. Action has been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of the motion as it stands, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no.
Just so we're clear, you're talking about moving forward.
And that's moving forward the planning board's recommendation.
But you want staff in the meantime to see if we can put in a place by which, provision by which the council would approve on a case-by-case basis.
Right, and that would be something that would require action on Monday night. That is 3 in favor and 1 opposed. So this will be on the general agenda. Councilman Bessie.
Just a comment, and this is to our colleague in the press. The impact of this action, were it to be approved by council, would be to turn every RS-zoned lot in Winston-Salem, 9,000 or above, potentially into a duplex without rezoning. I would suggest that neighborhoods that are concerned about tree loss, neighborhoods that are concerned about double rental situations without rezoning should perhaps take a look at that and express their thoughts on this to their council members.
All right, thank you for that. And in addition to that, I am and will on Monday night will very much push and ask for the addition for the rezoning component to be added to that. All right, Councilmember Larson.
Will this require a public hearing?
Yes.
It will be require a public hearing on Monday next week?
Well, I guess we need to find out if it was advertised for Monday, because it may not have been advertised.
No, I think we have to have a version that would then be advertised for that, because council has not yet had a hearing on this.
Okay.
So we'll work on it. I guess it won't be Monday. We want to try to set it for
The first Monday, well, that wouldn't be the first Monday, it would be Tuesday.
First Tuesday
in September.
But this committee won't see it again.
No. Gives
But
Councilmember
I'll
Bessie enough time to rally the
information
troops.
to you all about the language that we talked about in terms of the rezone.
All right, it's 6:07. We are over into Public Works Committee meeting time at this moment. There are 2 items left on the agenda for us to review today. I would ask a question in reference to the airport UDO piece of that. How time sensitive is that?
Mr. Chairman, that could be continued for another month.
Okay, I'd ask that we hold that and we move to item G5.
Item G5, ordinance amending Chapter 74 of the City Code regarding news rights.
Good evening, Chair Montgomery, members of the committee. This is before you is an ordinance amending Chapter 74 regarding the placement of news racks within the downtown business improvement district. This matter came before this committee back in June for informational only purposes. It's now back for you for consideration and a vote to send it forward to council. No changes to the ordinance between when it came in June and where it is now. I'm happy to give a brief overview of it. I know we're kind of pressed for time, but I can try to spit something out quickly if the committee desires.
Just a short review, just so everyone understands.
Sure. So again, this ordinance would apply only within the downtown business improvement district. That was sort of where the complaints stemmed, where all the news racks tend to be grouped together at certain intersections. Some intersections are obviously more problematic than others. Some intersections have way more news racks than others. The plan is, with this ordinance, to have policy developed in terms of being able to equitably distribute news racks within box corrals at certain locations within the bid. The Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership has put together sort of a tentative map of possible locations. Nothing obviously set in stone yet, but based on the current locations of news racks, it kind of makes sense to try to group them in those areas where they already are located. There will be some reduction, I think, in terms of the number of news racks within the bid, just when you're forcing, instead of allowing them to just string together, you're having a corral that may only hold 2 to 6 news racks. So one of the things that the ordinance is going to require is to have a set of equitable criteria for the city to use when allocating the location and placement of news racks upon the request or the petition of the publisher of the news rack for, I want this location, this location, this location. we'll have a set of criteria that will be developed sometime in the next 90 days when the ordinance goes, or when the corrals are required to be used. Another thing too is with this is to have the news racks. They will all be metal going forward. There won't be any more plastic news racks. The plastic news racks are not as sturdy. They're not as durable. There's more safety concerns with that. But that's sort of a quick and dirty of the ordinance. I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
All right. Are there any questions of the committee? I know this came before, and my understanding is that there's been engagement with publishers, and
That's
they
correct. Yeah,
understand
their engagement. No, at least not that's been voiced to me any objection to it. It's been very open-ended. We've had a lot of meetings with the partnership and with several of the publishers to get their input to make sure that this is, as drafted, is workable for them.
Okay. All right. Mr. Wamble, did you have any comments to share?
No, we have obviously.
Name and address for the record.
Ralph Wamble, 635 North Trade Street, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27101. We certainly don't want to take on the newspapers in a fight, so we have presented all the information that you have before you at all times, and the locations that the partnership recommended. We also sent those out to the publishers, and that seemed to work with everybody. I feel like we've gotten pretty good agreement on this, and it's the right thing.
Okay. Is there a motion? Approval. Committee members? Moved and seconded. Is there a second? The chair will second.
The chair can second.
All right. That's been moved and properly second. All those in favor, vote yes. Those opposed, vote no. All right. That is 3 in favor. Council Member Clark has had to leave early. All right. So that move approval, that will move forward to full council on Monday night. All right, we have finished the extent of our agenda, absent of holding item G4 until next month. We will consider the August meeting of the Community Development, Housing, General Government Committee adjourned.
And